Right. Good morning. Um, Welcome to another fantastic webinar by HR Talk. My name is David King, and I am a learning and development activist. It's far more exciting than consultant, and I'm really have been looking forward to this webinar today. It's something that I'm very passionate about. Is being an ally or allyship, and it is a term that's not particularly common in South Africa yet, but it's always good to be a trailblazer, and I'm hoping that I can really unpack some of the initial concepts. So it's really an introduction to what this term allyship is, and I'm sorry, I don't think it is interactive. But if you have the ability to unmute at any time, or you can, I don't have access to the chats, but please, if you can unmute, I'm happy to ask questions during the session, because I wanted to be as interactive as possible. I will check the chats once I'm no longer presenting. If there are any questions, if you want to pop a question into the question answer or chat box, I'm happy to answer them at the end or during, and also to connect with you afterwards. I will have my details at the end. So I'm really hoping that today's session will bring about awareness, and have a really passion for action. So it really is. It's important that we aware of stuff, but it's also equally or even more important that we do something about information. So hopefully you'll also find this quite practical. And as I said, if there's any further information you require, because this is really just an introduction 101, then please, I'm happy for you to make contact with me afterwards. So this webinar is called Allyship in the Workplace, and it is a term that, as I said, is very popular in particularly in Europe and the United States. And it's a concept that businesses are taking very seriously. It's obviously very much linked to diversity and inclusion, so we're going to tap into that aspect and that sphere. And as I've always said, as South Africans, we should be the shining example of diversity and inclusion experts. But we're not. But we'll find out shortly as to why we probably challenged in that space. So I think it's always good to start with a definition so that we're all on the same page. So like many things in life, if you Google it, you're going to come across many concepts and definitions, and there's some great stuff out there that I encourage you to go and tap into. But just to be clear and bring clarity and simplicity into the concept, allyship is a lifelong process of building relationships based on trust, consistency, and accountability with marginalized individuals or groups. So it's a concept that all of us can partake in. And as we're going to learn just now, there's so many components to being an ally. We are unique beings, but we also have lots in common, which we're going to unpack and tackle. So it really is trying to improve relationships with other people in your life and in your world that may be marginalized or underrepresented in some way. And we're going to see what that means. So, as always, where do we start? And as human beings, this is an area that we're not so comfortable in, is going to dig deep into who we are. So, without a doubt, before we can do much in the world, we need to ideally spend some time understanding who we are. And that fundamentally and psychologically, and backed by science and backed by research, is that you're not going to be able to assist others if you're unable to assist yourself. So it really is an opportunity And hopefully as we grow and as we mature as individuals, we realize that there's stuff that we may not even be aware of. That sits, and the analogy I always like to use is an iceberg. So the tip of the iceberg is obviously what we are aware of and the whole world is aware of. But what lies under the water are actually the gems, as scary as it is, the things that we should go and explore and discover and find out more. Because without spending time under the water, we're not going to grow and we're not going to improve and get better. So without a doubt, it starts with us. There is, really a founding human principle which can really open the gates to getting to know people better. And that is conversation. That is talking to each other. It's one key thing we can take away, if you can take away with you today, is getting better at talking to people and having a conversation, particularly when it's on a topic that you're not aware of or you don't understand, or even that makes you uncomfortable. Because that's often what we do. We tend to avoid conversations that are uncomfortable. So this is, as I said, if there's one thing to walk away with you today is practice. Challenge yourself to hold a conversation with somebody or on a topic that you don't normally do, because that's how we learn. It does not mean that you're going to change your opinion or change your view, but it could mean that you're going to have insights or lead to a greater understanding of something. So, it's important to understand that we as humans are very judgy. And that's a human infliction. So own it. Don't watch the wonderful talk on judgment. And if you claim that you are not defensive or you don't judge people, then you're either highly medicated or you're in complete denial. And that makes absolute sense, because it's a human infliction to be defensive and to judge other people. However, we need to be aware of most of the things we are being defensive about or judging others on actually lies within us. And if we go back to my analogy with the iceberg, that's the stuff that lies under the water. That's our upbringing, our background, our belief system, our value system, our life experience, our lived experience that we are using to judge other people. And this image, when I came across this image, it really brought this journey of being an ally together, because it really is helpful. It's 5 components that we need to take into account when becoming an ally for others, whether it's in your personal life or whether it's in your work life. And I'm going to go through it quite briefly, because as I said, this is just an introduction today. The first one is, which we're going to dig a little into this one, because this is a controversial one, is understanding our privilege. So we're going to look at what is this word privilege. The second component of the journey is get curious. So go and explore, go and find out, go and ask questions, go and do research. The third one is start with something. Just do something. It's the same as exercise. If we haven't exercised before, we tend to find every excuse under the sun as to why we should not exercise. You can't get up and decide, I'm going to run 10 kilometers today if you've never exercised before or in a while. You have to just show up and you have to start walking one step at a time with no judgment. That is what I'm talking about. So whether a single act means just do something in your sphere, something that you have control over, somebody in your life. That's what you need to tackle. You can't change the whole world, but you can change the world around you. The fourth one is be okay with making mistakes. And this one was a big learning exercise for me, because I don't think any of us like to make mistakes. And depending on your personality style or your social style, perfectionism, those of you who suffer from perfectionism, sorry for you, it means that you don't want to make a mistake. However, as human beings, we are going to make mistakes. That's how we learn. That's how we grow. And if you think of a child a child development, in children's development, they have to make mistakes to learn, and nothing changes as we get older. It's the same story. So when we make a mistake, we must almost accept that we're going to make mistakes, but it's how we handle that, how we deal with that mistake, how we correct it, or how we even apologize. And then my favorite, because this is obviously my space, learning and development, is to keep learning. Life is a never-ending journey of learning. Doesn't matter how old you get, you will constantly be learning and constantly be developing if you choose to. Otherwise, you're going to stagnate and you're going to become irrelevant. So key is to keep on researching, keep on learning, and keep on growing. Terminology. So yes, I'm sure you have all heard of the language around diversity and inclusion. So we talk about diversity, inclusion, equity, and belonging. So those are the 4 terms that are bandied around. And like most things in life, you hear them, but do we really understand what they mean? Because if we don't understand what they mean, we may not see the importance in it. And those of you who are in specifically in HR will have, and if you've been discovering and being curious and learning, you will see how titles and roles are shifting in the HR space. And one of the roles that are coming up that's becoming quite effective and in demand, particularly once again in the US and in Europe, but will hit our shores, is this role of a inclusion manager or diversity manager or even an equity manager. And if that's an interest of yours, then if I was you, I would start upskilling myself, because it's going to grow and there's going to become a massive need for it in South Africa. So just a heads up. So let's start with each of those concepts, just to ensure that we are on the same page and we are on track. Now, I'm going to come back to this video, but let me go to our next slide. Okay, so the first term that's thrown around is diversity. Now, this is a term that if we give ourselves a rating from 1 to 10, we probably as a society and as corporate South Africa, we would probably rate ourselves 7 or 8. Diversity is not complex in that we are a diverse society. So it means that we're bringing together people who are different. That's diversity. And if you look through most, and because South Africa has made it a very compliance-driven initiative, we meet all our requirements. So we have enough women, we have enough people from a gender perspective. Per province, we as you know, we rate people according to their race, so our 4 race groups, and we are given points according to that, and each organization has to include in their strategy how they're going to improve on that. So that's a compliance initiative, which is very different to what we're going to discuss later. So compliance is very necessary to make sure people are following the rules. But that's just the first step. That doesn't bring about change. So this is the focus currently in business South Africa, is diversity. So we're saying, yes, we're diverse. Look around us. We've got people from all race groups. We've got Indian, we've got black, we've got white, we've got colored. We've got male, we've got female, and if we're lucky, we've got some disabled people, so we're good. And that seems to be the key focus. What we're going to learn is that it's not about diversity. It's really about this term inclusion. And this is the tough part. So it's been beautifully described in many ways, but my favorite one is diversity is being invited to the dance. Okay, so you're invited to the dance. Inclusion is that you're invited to dance. So you're invited onto the dance floor and you partake. Now, belonging, interesting, is that the music type you're playing, are you playing the music that I like? Or are you being invited onto the dance floor and we are now waltzing? and you don't waltz, or we're being invited onto the dance floor and we're playing amapiano, and that's your theme, that's your music, then you're going to feel like you belong. So and I thought that was an interesting analogy. So diversity is being invited to the dance. Okay, so you get an invite, but you sit on the sidelines and you watch. Inclusion is that you actually get included. You join the dance floor and you partake in dancing itself. And from a South African context, there's two areas that we are obsessed with. And when we're thinking diversity and inclusion in South Africa, we think about race and gender. Those are our top two concepts. Naturally, because of our history and because of our past, we are going to focus on these two areas. But what I want you to be aware of, there's so much more, and this is where we can all play a critical role. So race and gender are essential. That we make those two areas more inclusive. But there are so many others, and this is what's going to actually unite us instead of divide us. So let's just quickly look at the list here. I've got race, languages, ethnicity, look at that, office location, sexual orientation, disability, age, generation, lifestyle, experience, family status, gender, and education, and then this is an American one, military and military service. So, and then the last one there, thinking and personality style. So do you see how complex it actually is? It's not just about the common ones that we throw around in South Africa about race or gender. So you can see why corporate South Africa and business in general are very nervous or very anxious about digging into the space, because it does open up so many things that we may not even be aware of. But that to me is where the learning comes in, and we've got to be brave and bold. And that's where we dive in. And that's probably the biggest challenge I see with my clients is they are aware of the language, they know that it should be done, but they don't know how to do it. They don't know how to go and dig into that space, because it's like, ooh, what's going to happen if we start opening up and we're getting people to share and come up with their viewpoints? How are we going to fix it? How are we going to manage it? So it's about losing control to get where we want to go. And a lot of people, most of us, feel very uncomfortable in that space. So hence the challenge around initiating or introducing strategy around this. Now, this slide you may have come across before, and it really explains and unpacks a difference between equality and equity and the importance, because you often hear the language around, well, I've given everybody the same tools, so why is everybody not performing at the same rate in business? If you look on the left, that's equality. So you give everybody a step to stand on. But if you look at the level and the height in this example and the disability of another individual, how is that helpful? Versus equity on the right-hand side, which you actually give people what they need. Okay, so it's not about preferential treatment or having my favorites, which is a very popular concept in South Africa. People talk about how you've got your favorites. Equity is giving people what they need so that they can perform, and that to me is a huge hurdle to overcome, because it's a mindset change. And if you haven't come across growth and fixed mindset, Carol Dreck's work, please go and investigate and Google it. I'll pop it in the chats later, in the chat box later. But it really will give you insight into how you can shift your mind from thinking why equality is the ultimate, when it's actually not equality. It's about equity. So now that we have looked at the three concepts, diversity, inclusion, and equity, and the fourth one is belonging, which we're not going to unpack today, but ultimately that's the dream. That's what we are striving for, and you'll see my final slide will reach that. So these are all attainable but it's not going to come easily. It's going to take work, it's going to take effort, and very importantly, it's going to take the change in your behavior and your outlook in life before anything can come about. So if that's the concept, so if those are if that's the terminology, let's break this down a little bit and start unpacking what it involves and what we have to go and dig at underneath the iceberg to find out some more. So the first one is what we all are challenged with is this concept of bias. And this is another very on-trend term that companies sometimes like to roll out unconscious bias training. Once again, most of these concepts that we are covering today cannot be one-hit wonders. You can't run a course on a 2-hour workshop or a half-day workshop on how not to be biased, because there's got to be behavior change. So it's directly linked to culture in an organization, and it's directly linked to you as an individual and your mindset and how you see the world. But we all have bias. It's because, once again, because of our upbringing, because of our background, because of our morals, because of our value system, because of our lived experience, we will take stuff. And when we meet somebody for the first time, what you are doing, you're taking all that and you are throwing it or vomiting it on the new individual to see whether or not they live up to your high expectations. So do you see how it's terribly flawed? Okay, so the issue often lies with us and not with the new individual that we meet. And the beauty, once again, of this content I'm sharing with you, it's all backed up now by science. It's not mumbo jumbo tree hugging nonsense, airy fairy crap that often used to be used as an excuse. It is pivotal to better understand who we are as human beings. So get that one, own that one. You are biased, you are judgy, which you've already learned, and you are defensive. What you can do about it. So here's a practical part. So when we are meeting somebody for the first time, let me choose pink-haired people. You do not approve of pink hair. So the first time we meet somebody, we're going to take that pink hair, and that is how we're going to determine whether we like that person or not. We are actually going to block out every other possible concept of that individual, because that pink hair completely drowns out everything else. So we're potentially missing out on an amazing opportunity to get to know somebody and get to understand somebody better because of our pink hair, because of their pink hair. And does that make any sense? No. Okay, so that's a silly example, but it's very relevant. So I made a list here before we started, just to also highlight the next concept that we're going to come across. So microaggressions is another concept that gets bandied around, and it's also important to understand that before we hit this topic of privilege. So, microaggressions are subtle, intentional, or unintentional stereotyping of somebody. It even can be an undertone to someone who is unrepresented or marginalized. And it's because we feel comfortable within our group or our excuse me, or our tribe, we have this confidence that we think other people think like us. Okay, so these are some prime examples which we throw around to somebody who speaks a different language to us, which is very common in South Africa, or is a different race from us, or politically thinks differently. I'm sure most of you have heard these, whether it's been said to you or you've heard it in a conversation. You speak English very well. Do you come from a Model C school? Where are you from? Everyone can succeed if you just work hard enough. So it doesn't matter what your background is. If you just apply yourself, you'll make your way through it. Don't be lazy. You're so articulate. And then Black Lives Matters versus All Lives Matters. So as you can see, some of them are subtle. Some of them seem to be just innocently coming across. We do that with religion. We say, what is that funny thing that your religion does, or why do your religion wears that funny band? What is it called again? Or why are you taking this day off? It's not a public holiday. We make these comments, and this is where we need to be reflective and go, am I being inclusive? Am I being derogatory? Is it just because of my background and my upbringing that I expect everyone to be the same as me? And if they're not, then I have the power to question it. There's a major drive, and it hasn't hit our shores currently, around public holidays and benefits. And I mean, HR Talk are experts in the space around, creating benefits for individuals, because most organizations have this package of benefits, and it doesn't matter who you are, your age group, your family dynamic, we all have the same benefits. Whereas the movement is now around individually me choosing my benefits that best suit me. And one of them is around public holidays, to say that if I'm not, for example, a Christian, I would like to take off religious days that are important to me, and it's called public holiday swapping. So instead of me taking off Christmas Day, I'm going to replace that with one of my holy days, whether I'm a Muslim or a Jew or Hindu, for example. And yes, from an HR perspective, administration might be more challenging, but at the end of the day, we're focusing on the individual. And those of you who are in business will know that the current generation coming to business is demanding so much more from environments. They're expecting the business to know what their business's purpose is and what's in it for me. And do I link with your values, and do I link with your brand or not? And can you, we could spend the whole day talking about remote working, but is your environment more flexible? I don't want to come into work, depending on the role, I don't want to come into work every day. I want to have flexibility around coming to work and working from home. And we can't go down the old route of going, no, there's one way or the highway. It's my way or the highway, because you're going to lose valuable talent. Right, intersectionality. Oh, that's a big term, and it's another one where it's not complicated. What intersectionality really means is that we're made up of many things. We're not one thing. And why I love intersectionality is because this is where we actually find commonality. Yes, we are hundreds and thousands of things. So I've done a list here, which I'm going to read out. And when I'm reading it out, I want you to think some of the things you can relate to, and some of the things that you may not be able to relate to. So I, David, am a stubborn person. I suffer from hay fever. I have an ingrown toenail. I drink Hunter's Dry and wine. I do not like beer. I love to travel. I love the news. I ride a scooter. I have 3 dogs. I'm a Zulu fan, even though I don't play soccer. I have 4 children. My way of re-energizing is going to the beach. I have blue eyes. I'm male. I love both ABBA and Amapiano. I eat tennis biscuits. I play tennis. My favorite meal is brownie. My favorite chocolate is Tex. I'm not a runner, but I always admire runners. When I see people running on the road, I'm like, whoa, it'd be amazing to be a runner. Now, that is a simple exercise of explaining how I can be many things. Sometimes, some of those you could relate to, and some of them were foreign to you. And that's what intersectionality is. And yes, so from a business and a corporate perspective, you must take all these things into account. So when you create events or team builds or activities or things that are going to improve staff morale, you must take into account all these potential components. And it is actually far more interesting and far more exciting to be aware of these millions of things that we either have in common or we don't have in common. But we will all find something that we do have in common. So if I'm if I'm engaging with a black male, we don't have race in common, but we have gender in common. And we both might have children, so we understand from a parent perspective, but we live in different suburbs. We've had a different upbringing, so we don't have that in common. So do you see how intersectionality is both for me, it's a great unifier, rather than divisive in any way. Then psychological safety, another term that's been bandied around a lot. Some amazing stuff out there. Once again, backed up by research and stats. And without psychological safety, and I'm sure we've all experienced that in our world of work, is that inability to feel safe, to want to contribute, to want to make mistakes, to want to offer ideas. Because as soon as you don't have the safety, we hold back and we withdraw, and we feel that we're not producing or we're not competent. I was given a shocking example the other day. I met a new colleague, and she shared with me why she worked. She's female, and she worked overseas in London. And she used to have this, and she's a high-level project manager. And she used to have this manager who was a white male, and every boardroom meeting that they had, well, initially when she first started, it was a room full of white males. She was the only female, and every time she tried to speak in the meeting, he would say, "Not now, Alison, not now." So he would shut her down. So that's a prime example where there's no psychological safety. And to this day, she's never been able to understand whether she was doing something wrong, that her contribution wasn't valuable, or it was simply a male-dominated space and they didn't believe that the woman should speak. And those females on this webinar, I'm sure, can relate to that. And that's something that males generally, heterosexual males, white heterosexual males, can't really relate to, because that is their world. The corporate table, the board table is their space. So this is where empathy comes in, and understanding of people's different experiences, because you can't tell a female that they must just be dominant and masculine, and that was the concept years ago, that women who need to succeed need to behave more like men, and that's how you will succeed, which was completely and utterly incorrect and completely flawed. So that is psychological safety. A lot of work still to be done with that, because corporate South Africa is still definitely dominated by white heterosexual males. And it has to be challenged. And if you really believe in diversity and inclusion, that has to change. Right. And then the very controversial concept of privilege has been raised. And when I saw this image, it was like, whoa, this really explains privilege very well. You've got two communities here, the haves and the have-nots, and divided by a road. So let's unpack what privilege is. And the definition is a special right, an advantage, or immunity granted. Okay, I'm going to say it again. It's a special right, an advantage, or immunity granted. So privilege can belong to anybody. We all have privilege, okay, in some way. And I'm going to look at the examples now. And it also may be completely out of your control. Your upbringing, you were born into a wealthy family or into a nice suburb, or you had an outstanding education, or the color of your skin is your privilege, or your gender, or your sexual orientation, or it may not be. So it's another way of putting it, it's the things that give you a head start in life. Okay, so you can't say, I do not take privilege seriously, because people from poor backgrounds, some people from poor backgrounds are able to fight their way out of that and become successful. The small minority. Okay, so even the poorest of the poor within their community may have privilege over somebody else. So if I have a roof over my head, I am more privileged than someone who doesn't. Even if I have a shack and my neighbor has nothing, I have privilege. To the other extreme of me being a white male, I have privilege over all other males, naturally because of how I arrived on this earth. Okay, so that doesn't gives me a head start. It gives me privilege. It's not an excuse, but with the power of privilege is that with privilege we are supposed to do something about it, and we're supposed to support others who don't have privilege. And I hope that makes sense. Now, the next couple of slides will hopefully pull it together. So I'm going to come back to privilege. So why do we need to be allies? Okay. So the first point is it's the right thing to do. Full stop. Second one is because it leads us to become more curious, to explore, and to seek a deeper understanding. Think about that. Rather than being irrelevant, close-minded, we should go and find out more information before we make decisions. It's going to be painful. You are going to suffer because it's uncomfortable, and that is how we grow. So as much as human beings want to avoid pain and suffering, if you've lived a life to date, you will have gone through pain and suffering. We may not want it to have gone through it, but we did, because that is life, and we've learned from it. Good and bad, we've learned from that experience. That is what that's Carol Dweck's work on growth and fixed mindsets. That is what we call the reality of life. We have to, when we're having a tough time, we have to say to ourselves, what is the learning here? What did I get out of it? Rather than woe is me, pity party. And from a business perspective, once again, it's a no-brainer. It's as clear as day. The research is telling us very clearly that the more diverse your team is, the more inclusive your team is, the more money you're going to make. And that's why I put it as the last point, because it is the last point. But to be business real, that it makes business sense. So not to have everybody in your organization that looks the same, that thinks the same. It's people with a diverse ability to think, and they all happen to look different. And it doesn't mean it's going to be easy to manage at all. It's going to be far tougher, but the outcome is going to be far better. So from a privileged perspective, again, from an ally perspective, what can you do? So how do you do it? Let's get practical. We've spoken about educating yourself. Okay, first thing first. Educate yourself. If there's something you don't understand, go and ask questions. Okay, go and do your own research. Own your privilege. So whatever your privilege is, for me, David King, my privilege is that I'm a white male, so already my birth has given me privilege. I haven't had to understand what it's like to be underrepresented. So I can take that and I can use it. I'm going to see now how I can actually do that. It's to accept feedback. So when people challenge you on your privilege, you don't have to defend it. Okay, own it. Accept the feedback. If you don't like the feedback, remember you don't have to fight it off. Rather, always if somebody gives you feedback that you don't like, say thank you for that feedback. I need to go and process it. You don't have to respond instantly. Become a confidant. In other words, as an ally, you must allow others to feel comfortable to talk to you. And that's very key. But there's trust there. There's huge trust requirements. You've got to live that. You've got to walk that. You've got to talk it before someone's going to come and share with you with any diversity or inclusion-related challenges. Bring diversity to the table. So if you have influence in your personal life, in your social life, your home life, your work life, you all have influence. You may not have influence over your entire organization, but you have influence over your team, you have influence over your family, and you have influence over your social friends. So when somebody speaks up Next point, see something, say something. If somebody says something that's derogatory in any way against somebody else, we do not keep quiet. We need to challenge it. Remember, there's the discomfort, there's the pain, there's the struggle, because it's much easier to keep quiet and to say nothing. But it's when we're in a group of people that look like us and sound like us and behave like us and say something against a marginalized group or an unrepresented group, that's where we have the influence to bring about the change. We can say that's unacceptable, that's derogatory, don't use that term. This is where you have the power, and that's where you have the influence. Sponsor marginalized colleagues if you're able to support those. There's the privilege again. And then build a community of allies. Okay, so hook people in to show that we are an ally. It doesn't matter what it is. You can be an ally for a woman, you can be an ally for gender identity, sexual identity, status, you name it. Find your groove, find your space in order to be an ally. Okay, watch out for this one in business. This is also very dear to me, culture. And here's my putting up my hand to admit guilt. I used to very much believe in this culture fit story. So we would find people. I was involved for many years in recruitment and learning development. And it was always this language around finding people the right culture fit. So when you interviewed someone, you'd go, oh, they're going to fit in beautifully here because they just like the culture, or they're just like me. So I'm going to feel more comfortable having this person who looks like me, sounds like me, has got a similar background, a similar upbringing, a similar religion, a similar view on life. And that's the person I must select. Once again, how flawed is that? Because what are you doing? You're bringing in clones. You're bringing in people that look just like you. When you pull a team together, you're supposed to do the polar opposite. So you need to bring in team members that are completely different to you. And if any of you have had the opportunity to do assessments similar to insights, social styles, Enneagram, Strength Finder, very powerful in business. And it should be something I always think included in part of the recruitment process, one of the components to use, because that will give you such a good insight. If you're missing a particular strength in your team, then here's a wonderful opportunity to find somebody who is very different to you. So those of you in the recruitment field, that's where it really starts, this whole story of diversity and inclusion and equity. So I like this concept of, could there be a culture add? Okay, because like anything in life, like tradition changes, cultures need to change. We need to adapt or die. If we don't adapt, we will die. So as much as culture and tradition are inherently part of us, we need to be open to better ways of doing things. And then some top tips to throw in. So what you can do in your world of work. These are 5 things allies can do to sponsor co-workers from underrepresented groups or marginalized groups. Speak their name when they're not around. Endorse them publicly. Invite to meetings. That's a very powerful one, to include people. How better are we going to learn? Whether it's age, that's another. I mean, diversity, inclusion, and can also lead to ageism. So we often don't include young people because we say they're young, they know nothing, they're green. But how else are we going to grow and learn if we're not included and part of? Share their career goals with decision makers. Recommend them for stretch assignments and speaking opportunities. Okay, so you're not there as their martyr, their spokesperson, okay, because you're better. It's not about being better. It's because you have some privilege at that moment in time. It may just be because you have experience, or that you have influence, or you have a skill set that people listen to you because of that. This is where you get to use your influence to be able to bring in others and include others and give them the opportunities. They have to work for it, absolutely, like you did. But we fall into that trap where I had to learn the hard way. I had to dive in without knowing how to swim. I had to fend for myself. So my team are going to have to do the same. That's not mentoring. That's not counseling. That's not coaching somebody, because no one's going to live your story. No one must live your journey. Everybody must live their own. And every one of us, if you think back in your careers, have had, even in your personal life, have had people in our lives that have either pulled us down or supported us or given us direction. And you want to be one of those people. You want to be a person that can take your privilege and take your experience and help others to grow and develop. Because ultimately, from a manager's perspective or from a leader's perspective, I think one of the greatest keys to identify whether you're succeeding or not is how many people are you growing? Are you growing others? Or are you holding people back? Now, I've got the next 3 slides is a lot of words, and I'm not a wordy person. I don't like slides with words, but I've been following Madison Butler on LinkedIn, and she's also a inclusivity activist. But there's just some key things I wanted to pull out from what she's very controversial. She will say it as it is, but I do enjoy the wording that she's a black female. She's a black gay female. And she says it how it is. And a lot of what she says really resonated with me and challenged my own thinking. And I'm going to read through very quickly with you. People's identities, people's families, and people's relationships are not up to debate. So all this debate around whether we like or don't like and how you live, she says it very clearly there. In a world where you can be anything, please choose to be kind, choose to be understanding, and choose to stop and think about your own thoughts. Okay, so there, once again, a lot of our issues that we have with other people are ours, not other people's. Self-awareness is key. It is not other people's job to make you comfortable. How often do we do that? We say, you make me feel uncomfortable, and we project that onto somebody else, because it's your job to unpack why you are feeling uncomfortable. So as soon as we're feeling uncomfortable about a situation or about a person, we should be asking ourselves, what is it within me that is making me uncomfortable? Why am I trying to blame the other person? It is your job to have hard conversations with yourself and biases in the mirror. Our biases don't go away, but we can be self-aware of them. So as I said right in the beginning, we have biases, just be aware of them. And then she went on to say, this is quite, a lot of the language is quite American, but some of it you can relate to. You don't have to relate to it all. The first one is, call yourself out on your bullshit. Use other people's pronouns. And that's another whole journey we could unpack, the use of pronouns. Degender your language. Respect people's lives, families, and relationships. Protect trans kids. You will mess up. That is part of this. And that's, I think, I'm going to constantly keep on referring to that. You're going to stuff up. You're going to make mistakes. I do it daily. As someone who's gone down the diversity and inclusion and equity road, you put yourself out there, but you're going to stuff up. You're going to make mistakes. Admit it. You're going to be challenged. Learn from it. Accept the feedback. Reflect on it, and then change. It's a never-ending journey, diversity and inclusion, a never-ending journey of change. You're not going to get to a stage where you've got it all right, because it is completely evolving constantly. So don't let your ego keep you there. If you don't understand something, research it. This work will require being uncomfortable. If you're not uncomfortable, you're not doing your work. And personally, as I said with you sharing, I used to think this was the most ridiculous concept ever. Why would we want to be uncomfortable? Avoid discomfort at all costs. And all I was doing was avoiding the ability to grow and to learn and to be a better person. And when I came across this quote, I was like, all right, this is spot on. So how true is this? Diversity is a fact. Equity is a choice. Inclusion is an action, and belonging is where we want to go and what we ultimately want to be able to strive for. And then finally, I wrote an article a while back, which when my journey first started, on this concept of allyship as a verb, because it really, really is. You have to do something. You can't just talk. There's an action. There's an action involved. It's not compliance. Okay. And this is where I think what's taken us much longer as a country to get down this road of diversity and inclusion is that we've made it a compliance focus instead of a change of heart. And those of you who are head people, that's wonderful. We need to be both, but we always lean towards being a heart person or a head person. Head person, there's facts, there's stats, there's evidence. It's not just an emotional connection. And that's really the power that we've been able to bring in a heart and a behavior change, as well as a mind shift and a mind change. So that's where you can find me to unpack this, either by phone or on LinkedIn, Facebook, or email. Or if you can't get me instantly, you'll find me on the beach, because that's how I go and I re-energize. So I'm going to stop sharing to see if we've got any questions. Okay. Okay. If you've got any questions or anything in the chat, I don't know if you've got access to the chat section, but if you do have any questions or chats, please pop them in, and I'm happy to unpack them with you. Or as I said, you may mail me if you've got any queries or want to take this further within your organizations. And if you're able to unmute, please unmute. That would be great. So thank you everybody who has joined today. I really appreciate your time, and I hope that you've benefited from this, and maybe some seeds have been planted, or there's some steps you want to take further.